You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. Your love changes everything. There's something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes every. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dance. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. Oh, there's something about your love, something about your love changes everything in my body. Oh, something about your love, something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing.
morning. Good to see you this morning. Firmly Rooted Ministries, Elder Matt Ryan. Pleasure to be with you. Friday morning, Rooted Men. Was trying to get this thing to split screen, and I brought it up too early, but that's okay. I don't think any of you will mind. So we're still in Mark this morning, and we've been working through this book, and you know, it's funny. There's a lot of things that a lot of times you come across a passage and wonder, but it's such a quick one. It's such a brief one. There's a little message and it's clear. Is it really something to dig into? So today that was my experience with this one. I really enjoyed looking at this from a just different perspective. The way that I typically do is, you know, to break things down word by word and kind of see what's really going on. And so today we're talking about Jesus healing a blind man, which he's done before in his ministry. It's something that has happened, and it's had different lessons with it. And this one's really interesting because you know, we see several things here. So we're in Mark 8:22 through 26. As you can see, you can read along with me. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." So, what do we see, right? We see God's authority, his power, his ability to do things we can't do, right? Seems quick and easy, right? Then I started kind of slowing down and reading it a little different, right? So it starts with they're coming to Bethsaida. So this is near where the miracle of feeding the 5,000 or the 10,000, depending on where in there we fall on the count of women and children. And so these were people who knew of Jesus' divine authority, divine power, ability to do miraculous things that they couldn't explain. And there's people bringing a blind man, begging Jesus to touch him. So it's interesting because what does blindness mean at this time, right? Blindness essentially means you're unclean, right? It was believed that you must have sinned or your parents must have sinned, and blindness was a punishment from God. And blindness meant you couldn't work, you couldn't do anything, you couldn't be of any value to the society. And so you were reduced to just begging. That was it for you. That was your lot in life. You were a beggar, largely ignored, pushed off to the side, didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, and unclean, meaning other people couldn't be around you either or touch you. So think of how lucky this man was already to have people around him who were willing to care enough not only to touch him but to bring him to Jesus. Not only is an exceptional act of faith to believe that Jesus could heal their friend, but it's an exceptional act of love to put themselves at risk, to label themselves as unclean, right? You think of all the social stigmas that they would have been subjecting themselves to by bringing this friend. But because their faith was so strong, they knew that Jesus could do things that weren't explainable, that he could do things that other people couldn't do. And they believed he could end this man's suffering. Interesting. So here we have this totally unclean, right? Totally undesirable person. Jesus, of course, is busy in his ministry, but what does he do? He immediately receives him, right? Doesn't matter that I've got other things going on. He's moved by the faith of these friends enough to say, yep, I'm going to pay attention to him, right? And we think about that, how often we're maybe coming to Jesus or maybe not, but he's taking time out for us, right? For no matter how insignificant the things might be or we may feel, here we see this is an example for us, right? He's taken time out. He's paying attention. He is receiving him when maybe you certainly wouldn't blame him if he didn't. And then he cares. He cares enough to take the blind man by the hand, again, touching the unclean, and leading him outside the village. leading him. This is something else he does. He takes us where we need to go, right? So you can kind of picture this, right? What do you think you would do when you're leading a blind person, right? We think about a dog leading them on a sidewalk, maybe. Well, there's no sidewalk here. There's no clear path. It's rocky. I mean, you've got to be warning him and caring about him enough to step around this, watch that, here, come this way, right? Truly leading him as someone who's entirely dependent on him, as you would be when you're blind and you can't see where you're going. You're trusting that you're being taken somewhere safe. You're trusting that the person's going to tell you how to get there without hurting yourself, right? How often is that us? Is that me? Father, lead me, right? Truly surrender myself to your leadership, just like the blind person would have to, right? He does it because he has no choice. But again, Jesus receives him, cares about him, leads him, right? All of these affirmative steps that Jesus has taken to be a part of serving this man. Then he spit on his eyes and put his hands on him and says, "Do you see anything?" Well, do you think Jesus knows, right? Whether or not the miracle is completely performed? He looked up and said, "I see people and they look like trees walking around." And then he does it again. And this is kind of one of those weird parts where we go, well, did it not work the first time? Was Jesus not able to heal him? Was he surprised when he couldn't see anything? Well, that's pretty unlikely, right? When we think about who Jesus was and what he was trying to do is always teaching. So we see this blindness be restored, but in steps, right? So the second time his sight was restored and he saw everything clearly. So Jesus restores him, right? Brings him to fullness in a way that he couldn't have expected. If he'd been blind his whole life, and this doesn't necessarily say he had been, but I think that's a fair assumption around the story. He had never known anything else. He would never have imagined that suddenly one day I'd be able to see, right? And when Jesus restores us, it's always better than we could have hoped for. So he restores him. Now, after this second phase, he can see clearly. And I think this is really a message for us. It was a message to show the disciples first, spiritual blindness, which we're all born with, isn't something that's going to be fixed in one fell swoop. So, disciples, don't be discouraged when something might not work the first time. Continue. But also for us, spiritual blindness is just the same as blindness would be received at this time, right? It leads you just as astray. You're hopeless, right, in that state. And we kind of have to come to our relationship with Christ in phases, in steps sometimes, don't we? When we first heard about Jesus, when we first believed or accepted into our lives that he did have the authority and the power to make things better and to give us a purpose, but there's still things we return to, right? We're still us. We're still going to be broken, and we got to keep working at it over and over each day throughout time. And so that's what I kind of see here is this process of keeping at it, right? When the people looked like trees, think how transformational that is. To you and I, we go, oh, gosh, it'd be terrible then to only be able to see shapes moving around. But this is someone who's never seen anything, right? And so even when he has this huge transformation, we look at it as, oh, the poor guy still couldn't see right. Oh, how bad would that be, right? How, now the kind of modern way to describe it as first world problems, right? We tend to look at things through this glass where we have these expectations of everything being perfect and anything less is a disappointment. And so I just want you to be encouraged, man, that even Jesus kept working, right? The same way we plant seeds in other people, it's not going to happen overnight. They're not going to wake up overnight. Spiritual blindness isn't cured in one step. It can be. There's no doubt it can be. But there's power in a lesson of watching Jesus do it twice, of watching him keep at it, right? And so the same thing for you, whether it be people you've been working on or praying for or planting seeds with, keep at it. And even if it's yourself, keep at it because it's worth it to find the restoration on the other side, right? It's worth it to continue on, to press into it. So I would just want to encourage you with that today. I hope that, maybe there's areas in your life where you see this, where you see something isn't clicking the way I want it to, something isn't fully restored. And I don't want you to give up on it. I want you to keep going just like Jesus has done with this man. I love you, brothers. I'm, of course, over time as usual. So I hope that's a good word for you today. I hope it encourages you. And as usual, let's make it a firmly rooted day. And may someone see Jesus in us today. Peace.